So you're a natural light photographer and that's why you don't use flash. Sure. Now let me tell you why I really recommend you start learning how to use your flash. Or buy one if you probably don't have one. So stay tuned to hear all about it. Now before all of you natural light photographers run to the comments and start hating on me, I get it. Learning flash is really hard. Now for me, I found it so hard that I actually went back to college and took a flash photography class just so I could feel more comfortable shooting with flash. But I will say I've heard it countless of times from photographers claiming they suck at flash or they just don't use flash, or the most famous one is I am just a natural light photographer. And the reality is, if you really want to make it more in the commercial side of photography with more product stuff, with working with businesses, you really have to understand flash. Now yes, you can get by with a speed light on top of your camera when you're shooting weddings. That usually tends to work and give you enough light for the photos that you're getting. But again, if you really want to niche down and try to get more of that product, that commercial work where you will need a beautiful light at all time of day, you really need to get a grasp of flash. Now if you are a Canon user and you're shooting with old Canon cameras, make sure to click the video right here. I'll make sure to link it somewhere around here, but I have already made a tutorial. I didn't go that much into depth as I will today, but in that tutorial I shoot with a Canon T3i and I talk about the flash and the transmitter that I am using with that current setup, that old setup I should say. Now if you're shooting Sony, which the majority of you guys watching this are, because I tend to talk about a lot of Sony. So now for the Sony setup, I will be sharing what flashes I use and how I connect them. So make sure you stay tuned so we can go over all this stuff. But first, let's talk about why you really need this. Now, like I mentioned, you really have to control the light. And I actually had a shoot where this thought of this video actually came. I was actually hired by a local bar and they wanted to get some drinks shot, but they wanted more of a moody vibe going on. Well, when I went to go do these photos, they actually wanted me to go later on in the day to kind of catch some of the bar vibe. When I got there, I obviously got prepared for this. I took all of my flash setup. I take it on this little tiny wagon, but I knew immediately I was gonna shoot this with flash so I could get some nice light and kind of really highlight the drinks and separate them from the actual background. But I was able to get the job done and I actually really enjoyed these photos. Now, if I would have been a natural light photographer, there's no way I would have been able to nail this. I had no light available. I would have been shooting really high on my ISO or completely wide open at 1.8, 1.2 or so, and totally missed the focus on these photos. So this is like the biggest one where I found it. I need to tell you guys, you have to learn how to use your flash. Now I've also gotten some work with a really great client of mine where I tend to do a lot of product launches, and for that we always need to flood the product. We need to make it look very nice, bright and airy, and for that I always make sure to take some flash. When I try to go with natural light, you never know what the situation is going to be like. You can be shooting inside somewhere that's completely dark, of a car or whatever the situation might be. You gotta be ready for whatever they throw at you, and you have to make sure you make some great bright photos. Now I'm sure you guys have thought about this. Now let's just dive into the flashes and what settings I make sure I have on them. Now every camera has a different form of basically like a sensor that will connect on the actual hot shoe. That's why it's a hot shoe. It sends information to whatever is connected to it. This is actually a transmitter. This is a Flashpoint R2 Pro S. So this is actually what is called a transmitter. This will send the signal from my camera to whatever flashes I have out there, and this sits on top of the camera. Now I mentioned that each of them are different and they send the information through the actual hot shoe that's on the camera itself, because you have to be careful. You can't just grab a Canon transmitter and connect it to a Sony camera, because they all have different pins where it connects and transmits the information. They are not interchangeable within camera brands, if that makes sense. The biggest thing I noticed having owned Nikon and Canon flashes is that Sony adds these little like kind of copper threads that seem to connect with the camera so it can actually talk to it. Now the flash that I use, I have a couple. I have an AD200 and AD600, and these are kind of my go-tos even when I'm actually shooting like studio stuff, because if you don't need insane amounts of light, Speedlights will get the job done. The big studio lights, I honestly rarely take that out unless I'm trying to photograph someone in the middle of the day and I want to beat the sun and I need that much power. Now there's no real need for that when you start, so don't worry, you don't need to make a crazy purchase. These flashes are right about $100. They're old now, so I don't know where they're sitting at. I know they have many new versions of this, but this is the Zoom R2, and again, this is Flashpoint. All my stuff is Flashpoint. You have to be careful with that, because sometimes if I were to buy, even Godox, which I believe makes Flashpoint, even Godox itself might not receive all the information that I want it to. And I mean, it might flash on its own, but it might not go into other settings that I might want to use. So you gotta be careful. It's not gonna work with ProPhoto, most likely. I haven't tried it, but again, not all functions are interchangeable within the actual flash brands and camera brands. So make sure you buy the correct transmitter and the correct flash so they can all talk to each other. Now the biggest settings that you have to go through is make sure that both the flash and the transmitter are on the correct channels and groups. Now these are in place so you can actually control many flashes with one transmitter, and it's between a lot of channels. So if there's another photographer, you guys can just be on different channels, and my trigger is not triggering the other photographer's flashes. It can happen. You don't want that to happen. Now you can go really cheap. All you need is a manual flash that has a slave mode. They all will most likely have that. This day and age flashes are great. I don't think I ever experienced bad flashes that didn't have that. So now the number one thing, again, this is on channel 1. My flash is going to be channel 1, and right now I have it set to group A. If this has to be group A, group A is going to be this flash. If I want to connect a second flash to throw like a kicker or just have more fill light, that one's going to be group B. So that way I can change the settings from here onto this without having to touch these or anything. It's all on top of my actual camera, so it makes it so much easy when it comes to trying to get to these flashing at the right amount of light. Now your mode, you want it to be manual like I mentioned, and you want it set to slave mode. It'll have like an S or something, and that's basically it. And then you go right into your transmitter, hit the flash button, and there you go, we're flashing away. So it's really easy to connect them. Honestly, if you can grab your camera, learn how to shoot, you can definitely play around with these and connect them. But just the biggest thing is your cameras will have a dedicated shutter for these, and it's usually between a 125 to 1/60th, I believe. And if you are getting like black bars in the photos in the bottom of the frame or top of the frame, that means that your shutter is not, it's too slow. Is it? It means that your shutter is way too fast and it's closing right before it takes all of the light from the flash. So that's where high speed sync comes through. You do not need high speed sync unless you're trying to shoot at a very high shutter. If not, which honestly you don't really need to, unless very specific times you might need a high shutter, but this will freeze motion. Flash will freeze motion unless it's really fast motion. I rarely have the need to throw on high speed sync to give you guys an idea. When I'm at weddings, I don't use it, so you know, that type of movement, you're good to go. Now TTL, it's through the lens. The actual camera will be telling you the flash at what rate it thinks it needs to flash. That's just another fancy stuff to saying auto. So again, you do not need TTL, you do not need high speed sync for your first flash, especially if you're just doing simple product photography in your home or out on location. Yeah. So again, you will have a shutter already set. Your ISO, I start around 100 to 400, nothing crazy. And then from there, the aperture, I would highly recommend you shoot anything higher than 8. And by higher, I mean f8 to like f12 when you're shooting products, because you really want a lot of it in detail. And then from there, you just adjust your flash to get it to the right light that you need. And there's a lot of techniques you can use, like bouncing off a wall, bouncing off a white cardboard, using diffusers, and I briefly talk in that one video I mentioned. I will try and get more into this. I did get some stuff in the mail that I will potentially use for some future videos, so make sure you stay tuned on that. So definitely, if you're a natural light photographer, just stop. You're not a natural light photographer. You just haven't tried to learn flash, and you can do this. You can totally do this. I believe in you. Now, if you go ahead and buy any of these and go work, do some flash photography, make sure you tag me. I would love to see some of you guys' work and maybe pitch in on some thoughts or so. Now, that is all I have for you guys today. Kind of a rantish, but I really wanted to touch bases with this because it's helped me out a ton in getting more work within photography. So make sure you get it. Make sure you learn how to use them. All right, guys, that's all I have for you guys today, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace.